Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's Meet the Analyst webinar. US AR and VR forecast, retail and social media are driving consumer adoption. I'm your host, Jasmine Enberg, Principal Analyst at Insider Intelligence, and I am in our New York City office today. I'm joined by my colleague, Principal Analyst Yory Wurmser, who's in New Jersey. Hey, Yory, great to have you here.
Hey, Jasmine, good to be here.
Before we get into the main presentation, I'd like to thank QuickFrame by Mountain for making today's webinar possible, and to welcome Hannah Blahut, Global Account Manager, Channel Partnerships at QuickFrame by Mountain. Hannah is also joining us from New York. Hey, Hannah.
Hey, Jasmine, thanks so much for having me.
Just a couple of things before we dive in. As always, we have a ton of information to share, but there's no need for you to take notes. We'll email you a link to view the slides and the full recording. But we do want you to participate. We encourage you to submit questions during the presentation using the questions tab below at any time. We'll do our best to get to as many as possible as we can later on during the Q&A. So just keep them coming. But with that, Yory, let's get started. What's on the agenda for today?
Thanks, Jasmine, and thanks to everyone for joining us for today's webinar on our AR and VR forecast. So, Jasmine, as you said, our agenda is this really. We're going to start with our AR and VR forecast numbers. We'll go through those numbers in a fair amount of detail. We'll move on to some of the technological drivers of AR and VR growth. Then we'll do AR and VR and shopping before wrapping up with some opportunities for brands in advertising and marketing. So let's start with the forecast. And just to lay the groundwork, we define augmented reality as something that enables a user to interact with virtual objects and other digital information overlaid on the real world. So that includes things like Snapchat filters or lenses, more immersive experiences with headsets, really a whole range of things, including projections onto a car windshield. Virtual reality we define as something that immerses a user inside a non-fixed 360-degree visual environment. User interfaces with multimedia content via connected TV, desktop, laptops, mobile devices, or headsets. So that'll include everything from something on MetaQuest to the dedicated VR headset to a 360 video on mobile. So a large range and probably a pretty expansive definition of virtual reality. And just as an aside, I'll occasionally use the term mixed reality in here. It's really just a hybrid of these two. It's usually refers to something like the HoloLens, which is an AR headset that also has some virtual reality and virtual world features to it. So now that we have those definitions clear, I want to take a look at this chart, which is a neat summary of our whole forecast in one chart. First, I want you to take a look at the red line, which represents AR users in the US. And what the line shows is really a pretty steady linear growth for AR users. Second, take a look at the black line, which shows VR user growth. And with that line, it's a little bit different. It starts to flatten out this year before getting really almost plateauing by 2025. It's not to say growth ends. We're still adding users, but the number of users is going down. And lastly, I think the third big story from this chart is just that there are a lot more AR users than VR users in the US, and that's not going to change in the next few years. Okay, now that we have that overview chart, let's dive into this chart, which takes a closer look at the AR numbers. Right up front, I want to point out that we've lowered our overall numbers from last year's forecast. If you recall last year, which maybe a few of you do, we expected that AR users would surpass 100 million in the US this year. We've lowered that, not because we're less bullish on AR. In fact, we're just as bullish, if not more bullish than we have been in the past. But we have better data from past years and we lowered our base numbers. So we're now expecting AR users to surpass 100 million in 2024. The other thing you can see is with the blue line that we still are expecting double-digit growth in the next through 2022. That's for the red line, sorry. And we expect that growth to slow to single digits, but still pretty healthy through 2025. Social media is one of the primary drivers of AR usage. Over 60% of US AR users are experiencing AR in social media, although that share, the blue line, is very gently decreasing over the next few years. Jasmine, I know you've done a ton of research on social media AR. What are the social media companies doing to attract so many users?
Yeah, it's a great question. Snapchat really put AR on the social media map. The reality is that right now, primarily AR on social media is being used for entertainment and communication purposes. I think the next phase of growth within AR on social media is really going to relate to retail and shopping experiences. And we're starting to see a lot of these platforms roll out AR tools to facilitate that.
Yeah, and I think we're going to get into both of those things later on. I think you're absolutely right. That it's common. It's making a transition from entertainment to e-commerce, not losing sight of the entertainment value, but definitely moving more into e-commerce. Along with social media, retail is a big driver of AR usage. The number of retail AR users is increasing pretty rapidly. That's what the chart overall shows. If you look at the blue line, that's the growth rate for retail AR users. Again, that's a red line. I'm not colorblind, I'm just making a mistake here. The growth rate for retail AR users is actually quite a bit above the pace for social AR users. In fact, the number of retail AR users will double between 2020 and 2025, and the growth will remain strong throughout the forecast period. I also want to be clear that social media and retail AR users are not mutually exclusive. You can be both. You can be an retail AR user if you use AR for shopping, and you can be a social AR user if you use it for social media. And in fact, as Jasmine alluded, social media is starting to transition to having more e-commerce options. So if you do shopping on AR social media, you actually fall in both categories. Before I move on to VR, I want to make clear that there is a third driver of AR that we don't really talk about that much because we don't estimate the user numbers. Artillery Intelligence does measure or has interviewed AR users and found that 89% of AR users that they interviewed play AR games, which was the top category. Now, I think there might be some sample bias here because dedicated or really intensive AR users are probably over-indexing for games. But there's no denying that games are a really important part of AR. And in fact, things like Pokemon Go probably were an early introduction for a lot of people to what AR can do. So let's jump to VR now. And there are a couple of things I want to point out in this chart. First, 2021 was a really big year for VR usage. Looking at the red line, you can see a big jump in users in 2021. And this year, the growth is slower, but it's still a pretty healthy 8.6%. But that growth is going to start tapering off pretty seriously after this year. I want to clarify that these figures are for overall users. It doesn't measure the intensity of use, which may be increasing. So remember, we defined VR as including anything that's 360 immersive, including videos and things like that. The users of more immersive VR may be increasing more rapidly than this chart would suggest. And the reason that I say that is in this chart, which shows VR headset users, so people who use things like HTC Vive, Meta Quest 2, Meta Quest, any of those VR headsets. If you check out the red line, there's just a really intense bump in 2021 when, and I think a lot of that just has to do with the release of Meta Quest 2 in October 2020. Meta Quest really dominated the market for VR headsets, bringing pretty affordable VR in a pretty highly functional and pretty strong headset, and that led to an explosion of users. In fact, the Meta Quest 2, according to IDC, the International Data Corporation, represented 78% of VR headsets shipped globally last year. In fact, so this is the study, the same IDC study. Doesn't highlight Meta Quest, but it does show a big jump in both AR and VR headsets that we're expecting, that IDC is expecting over the next few years. The VR headsets should double between now and 2025. And in fact, AR should increase by tenfold, going from 1.4 to almost 14 million shipments worldwide. These are global numbers. So huge growth in the number of dedicated headsets for AR and VR. So what's driving this growth in headsets and in general for AR and VR? Well, I think a big driver of this is the metaverse. There's a lot of hype around it. In fact, I'd probably say there's not really a metaverse right now, but rather it's how people think about the metaverse going forward. You know, what's the hyped vision, or what a lot of leaders in the tech industry think will happen in the not too distant future with AR and VR. And we'll talk about that in a bit more in depth in a few minutes. But all of these companies want to find a way to get a foothold in the metaverse when it does take shape, whatever form it takes. So let's start with some of the biggest companies. Meta spent over $10 billion last year, or actually even made $10 billion investments in its reality lab that develops things like the Quest and more advanced VR and AR headsets. They have Project Aria that is kind of a smart glass AR headset as well. They're developing haptic wearables. Really, I think you could argue that Zuckerberg started thinking about the metaverse all the way in 2014 when he bought Oculus. So Meta, as its name suggests, is a real leader in investing in the metaverse and investing in VR and AR. Microsoft had HoloLens is really a breakthrough AR dedicated headset, really a mixed reality headset. They are always rumored to be releasing the HoloLens 3 at some point, although most recent rumors are that they may never release it and instead partner with Samsung on a dedicated AR headset. So lots of investments by Microsoft. Google has, obviously it had Google Glass 10 years ago, or more than that, 12 years ago. But since then, it's invested pretty heavily in AR. It has Project Iris, an AR headset. It bought North, which is a company that develops smart glasses. And it has Project Starline, which is a holographic conferencing system. So lots of projects that we know about, and probably a lot of projects we don't know about that's happening at Google Labs. And Snap has Spectacles 3, which are basically the first AR version of their spectacles. It's not really meant for consumers, it's more meant for developers, but it's clearly part of a project, part of a path that they're following to deepen their investments in AR, which includes acquisitions of companies like Wave Optics that develops AR displays, or brain interface companies like NextMind. So tons of investments by those companies. And if you look at other companies, Amazon has a developer platform called Sumerian AR. Lenovo has smart glasses. Ericsson has an AR platform called Ethos. And even ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, recently bought VR maker Pico. So lots of investments by the big companies. And of course, there's one company I didn't mention, that's Apple. And it's not because it's not important, because it's so important. It's really the 800-pound gorilla. Tim Cook has really been careful about avoiding joining the hype around the metaverse. But that doesn't mean that Apple is staying away from the metaverse. The company is investing heavily in augmented reality. I don't have to tell anyone here that Apple, when it enters a market, has the possibility and a track record of completely changing it, whether it's digital music with the iPod, smartphones with the iPhone, tablet market with the iPad, or smartwatches with Apple Watch. Just a real ability to form the market to its vision. And it seems to be have a plan to do that with AR. It already introduced LiDAR, which is a more advanced sensor for depth that makes much more sophisticated and sensitive AR applications. Already introduced that in iPhone 12, spread it out in iPhone 13. It's rumored to be developing an AR and VR headset for developers that might release later this year, but probably more likely in 2023. And there are also rumors that it's developing smart glasses, maybe its version of Google Glass in 2024. But it's not just the hardware that matters, the software matters a lot too. And many of the largest software developers are building AR and VR developer tools. Some notable ones include Niantic, which released Lightship, which is the platform that it used to build Pokemon Go. Niantic's the maker of Pokemon Go. You have NVIDIA with VRWorks and developer tool and the Omniverse 3D simulation platform. You have game companies like Unity and Epic with their own AR and VR developer tools. Most of the big tech companies have their own developer tools for AR. And Google, Niantic, and Snap also are developing a 3D map of the world, and probably some other companies as well, that will let location anchored AR, and that, for that matter, autonomous driving and things like that, gives those abilities to these companies as well for augmented reality in the real world, for things like Pokemon Go, but for all types of different applications, not just games. Snapchat, for instance, just recently released custom landmarkers, which are these anchored augmented reality experiences. But it's not just the big companies. I've talked a lot about big tech, but a lot of the innovations in AR and VR are coming from the smaller guys. According to Crunchbase, VC investments into AR and VR startups hit a record for $1.9 billion in Q4 2021. For 2021 as a whole, sorry, that number was for Q4. For 2021 as a whole, VC investors are poured in $3.9 billion, which was the second highest total ever after 2018. So there's just a lot of investment in the metaverse and in the technologies behind it, which is AR and VR.
So Yory, there are clearly so many companies that are involved in building the metaverse. Who's going to win? Who's going to win the race to the metaverse?
I mean, that's a great lead in for this, Jasmine. You're 100% right. It's unclear right now. It's too early to know, but there are really two different versions of the metaverse. The metaverse doesn't exist really right now, but the vision for the future really divides between companies that are emphasizing the VR parts of it more, companies like Meta and maybe some of the gaming companies, and the more AR-centric versions for companies like Snapchat or Google or Apple. I might get into it a little bit more later, but AR and VR, there's going to be some mix of it, but the balance is still up to debate, and we'll see. Besides the metaverse, I want to bring up another set of technologies that will be very important for AR and VR, and that's 5G. A lot of the more sophisticated use cases for AR and VR will need 5G, but not the 5G that's roughly that most of us, the 100 million in US users, according to our forecast, are getting today. What we really need are some of the lower latency, higher throughput speed networks that will allow for smaller on-device computers and better edge computing. And that's only going to happen once the 5G networks are standalone, which means are purely 5G, are sending data, all the data in 5G, and the core network, sort of all the systems in between, are updated to 5G standards. And once we get that, I think that's really going to release a lot of possibilities for AR and VR devices. So when we combine all of these investments in new hardware, in new developer platforms, and in 5G, we should get smaller, more powerful devices, more realistic experiences, and complementary sensors and devices like this lovely glove that Meta's Reality Lab is testing. Now, I'm making fun here, making light of it. This is clearly just a concept device. It's not meant for consumers, and it's probably not even meant for developers right now. But it is testing technologies that will let you literally feel virtual objects or realistically move your avatar's arms or legs. So no more headless avatars if this stuff works, and actually some pretty cool and immersive AR, VR experiences if the haptic, those sensors within a glove work, and other devices like that too, like vests. You already see some gaming vests that are haptic that let you feel like when a bullet hits you. Hopefully not as painful, but with real sensations. Before I leave the topic of technology, I want to touch on two other areas briefly. The first is cars. A lot of car makers are adding heads-up displays to project driving or navigational information directly onto the windshield. Numerous companies, from BMW to Toyota and Chevrolet, and actually a lot of other companies as well, have introduced these systems. Right now, the information is limited to things you'd see on your dashboard or navigational systems. This might evolve into other areas as autonomous driving improves. So you could see other types of experiences or search, things like that pop up. So still, the type of experiences are pretty catered to the driving experience right now. But even so, it'll probably make a lot of people more comfortable using AR elsewhere. And I have to say, they are really cool when you see them in practice. They're very cool systems. Lastly, despite all of the innovations in more advanced hardware that I've discussed right here, I want to make clear that most people will still experience AR through their smartphones, at least over the next few years. Yeah, it's true that advanced AR experiences may be the most vivid in smart glasses or something like the new version of HoloLens or a Samsung dedicated AR headset. But it's likely that the same applications will exist on your phones. And for most people, that's how they're going to experience it. And that's part of the reason that artillery intelligence and insider intelligence as well believes that the revenues on mobile from AR are going to increase pretty rapidly over the next few years. So to this point, I've gone through how the tech industry's dreams of the metaverse are driving the investments into AR and VR. But there's been a lot of innovation among retailers and e-commerce companies as well. And those companies, as well as those companies that want a piece of the e-commerce pie. So let's start with social media companies like Pinterest and Snapchat, which are both big tech companies as well, but they're also growing their e-commerce platforms, as Jasmine mentioned a little while ago. Pinterest has an AR try-on tool for beauty products and home goods, which does exactly what the name suggests. It lets you try on a beauty product or see how a piece of furniture looks in a room. Snapchat's AR shopping lens brings some pretty cool technology to let users virtually try on fashion, like these sunglasses, for instance. But I want to make, I just want to give credit where credit's due. A lot of these tools aren't new. IKEA had a tool for furniture, I think 2015, and Sephora had something for a lipstick try-on in, I think 2017 or something like that. So these things have been around for a long time, but Snapchat is bringing AR more into the mainstream. Jasmine, I know you've written a lot on this. How does this fit into their longer-term strategy? Do you think TikTok and Instagram are going to follow as well?
So augmented reality really is the cornerstone of Snapchat's ambitions within social commerce. The other social platforms, meaning really Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, haven't leaned so heavily on augmented reality yet, even though they're all entering into the social commerce space or are big players already within social commerce. But we have seen some investments. Particularly with TikTok, it just rolled out its effects house, which allows creators to create their own AR effects. It was in beta testing for a while, and now it's available to all creators. So they're definitely working toward improving these AR experiences on their platforms because it's clear that it really can help drive shopping experiences on social media.
Yeah, and I think with their purchase of Pico, you're seeing that they're really dedicated to the idea of AR and VR going forward. So I think you're right. TikTok is definitely going to be a player in this. In general, just from this chart, you can see that we're predicting pretty strong growth in social commerce going forward. So social is a big part of it, and AR and VR is going to be a part of that. These product visualization tools, like the Snapchat try-on tools and the tools in Pinterest, have real potential for retailers as well, not just the social commerce companies. So we expect a lot of investments in AR going forward by retailers and e-commerce companies beyond the social world. According to NRF, 20.8% of online purchases were returned in 2021. So we're talking about over $100 billion of merchandise that was returned as a result of the satisfied consumers. So if these tools can reduce returns and increase conversions, that's really important and can save a lot of money and have much less environmental impact too, since a lot of the carbon impact for retail comes from deliveries. And the evidence is that they do, that these visualizations do reduce returns by as much as 40%, according to a study by Shopify, and increase conversion rates by as much as 94%, according to the Harvard Business Review, as cited by Snap. So definitely, these are companies with a vested interest in making AR seem powerful. But I think that these numbers are indicative of the power that AR can have in reducing returns and increasing conversions. And AR can do more than just revolutionize e-commerce and online product discovery. It also might play a role in the in-person shopping experience, making it more vivid and making it more immersive. So I think in this slide, I point out 3 ways that I see it making a difference. One is product visualization. So the same way you can visualize something online with a Snapchat lens, you can have it in store, and you can even have it more immersively in store if the store gives you a VR headset like Macy's does, and see your space IRL, which is a way to see in real time how a piece of home goods or furniture looks in a space or in your room. It can create a second way VR and AR can help is by making a more immersive experience. Tilly's, the sneaker store, the shoe store, created an experience where they created a screen where you could look into the screen and see yourself with the store in the background, but with imaginary objects like floating sneakers or crazy animals or dragons flying behind you. So that is not necessarily going to lead to more conversions, but it is going to make the shopping experience just more immersive and fun, and will probably drive people into stores in a moment when stores are having problems bringing people in. Third, it's going to make more seamless shopping. Great example are the magic mirrors or smart mirrors do you see in some stores these days that let you try on clothes or try on something, try on clothes virtually, or try on or see a different color of a clothes of a blouse, let's say, that you tried on. So ways to give you more choices and more visualizations so that you don't have to try on 5 blouses to get one idea. And that's what you can do today. Down the line, there are probably ways to use the metaverse or some version of the metaverse. A good example of how people are, or how some retailers are thinking about that now, more as a concept, is this store that Samsung presented at this year's CES in January. It's a digital twin of its flagship store in New York City. At least it's a twin on its outside. If you go in, there are all these experiences that you can do. You can see different demonstrations. You can earn NFTs. This is hosted in Decentraland, which is a crypto virtual world, crypto-based virtual world. So there's a lot of innovation here with these digital stores that are just concepts now, but may very well become more prevalent or become something that a lot of us use if the metaverse ever takes off. It's cool to look at this because it's just an idea. You know, this is the way some of the people who are pretty creative in retail right now are thinking about this stuff. And lastly, before I look ahead too much, or before retailers look ahead too much, they still need to focus on some of the low-hanging fruit. According to our most recent consumer survey with BizRate, something we do every few months, 13% of US adults use AR and VR while shopping, which roughly corresponds to our forecast numbers, but a further 39% are interested in it, but not yet using it. So really 3x of the number of users compared to the people who are already using it. So that's just a lot of potential for companies like Snap or Meta to create AR and VR experiences that are going to make shopping better and more accessible in a way that attracts more people. So that leads me to my last section, which is opportunities for brands. As with shopping, AR and VR will provide opportunities a lot of different opportunities for advertisers. Right now, AR advertising is still pretty small scale. The 2.86 billion in mobile AR advertising that Artillery Intelligence estimates for this year is between 0.6 and 0.7% of total mobile advertising spend this year. So it's a pretty small part, or I wouldn't say negligible, but it's small. But the growth is really strong, roughly doubling every 2 years, and it at least between 2020 and 2024. And it's just indicative of how much opportunity there is there in AR advertising. I have a feeling that Hannah might get into that in a few minutes, but definitely there's a lot of opportunity there. And there already are a lot of examples out there of people using AR or VR in their advertising. Snapchat obviously has sponsored AR lenses or shopping lenses or ways that you can interact with a virtual overlay. Cool stuff. And definitely companies are using them. There are traditional media that use QR codes to launch AR experiences. A great example is this Volkswagen ad that launches from a QR code on an Amazon box. And lastly, there are all types of experiences in gaming or other virtual experiences, virtual world experiences where the advertising is in the background. Could have a standard display ad as a billboard in a racing game, for instance, or there could be a sponsored avatar in a game like Roblox or Call of Duty or whatever. There are many different ways you can sponsor or have sponsorship opportunities within these games. So just to wrap up, AR and VR user numbers will grow steadily through 2025. We're pretty bullish on AR in general, probably more so than with VR in terms of overall user numbers. And that has to do with mobile. It's just really easily accessible for a lot of people. Second, social media remains a big driver for AR and VR user growth. The majority of AR user experiences are in social media and will probably remain in social media. AR and VR will provide opportunities within e-commerce to increase product visualization and reduce returns. That power of AR and VR will make it super attractive and lead to more uses in retail. And lastly, brands are still feeling their way around AR and VR, but more marketing opportunities are emerging. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jasmine.
Thank you, Yory. That was so great. There's clearly so much opportunity within AR and VR today. We've gotten a ton of great questions, but before we get to those, we are now joined by Hannah Blahut from QuickFrame by Mountain. Welcome, Hannah. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you again for having me. And thank you to everyone who is joining at home or in office or wherever.
So I have a few questions for you. And the first is, how can brands use augmented reality as part of their marketing strategy today?
This is a great question. Before brands even really start to brainstorm for their first augmented reality ad effect, I think it's really important that they start to consider the format and really start thinking about augmented reality advertising differently than how they might consider a standard video or photo ad unit. And that's really because what we're seeing across the board is that, and what we can expect to continue to see, is really this increased expectation on the user's part as to what constitutes as a good ad or as an ad that's worthy of their time. This increased expectation has really led to a shift in user behavior. It's no longer, oh, I know that brand, I'll look at this cool picture or I'll look at this cool video. It's more like, oh yeah, I know this brand or I'm interested in this brand. What can they do for me? What is this going to be experience-wise? Is this going to delight me? Is this going to surprise me? And so the first step in making sure that the effect that you create is really worth engaging with. AR effects and advertising are inviting your consumers to engage and explore. So it's crucial that AR creative feels more like a gift to the consumer rather than an ask. And when considering this concept of gift versus ask, I love sharing this auto example that our team at QuickFrame worked on a while back. This brand really understood the importance of giving their audience an experience. It was super important to them that the filter effect captured the details and the luxury of the interior. And in working together, we were able to develop this effect to truly invite their consumers or customers in and give them the gift of entry into this new model of car. And just to sort of double click on this example here, what we see on the left of this effect being on the right and looking at the picture of the car on the left, is an ad unit that ran within feed and on Instagram to drive users to experience the filter, which leads us to the question of what platform to run on and how to get eyeballs and get people to actually experience these AR effects that you're putting work into. Clients today can create custom branded AR experiences across Snap, IG, Facebook, and to your point, Jasmine, most recently TikTok. Each platform comes with its own nuances. So on Snap, for example, it's possible when a user is playing around on a filter to swipe up, go to site, and convert automatically. Meta today does not have that capability with their AR effects, but what they lose there, they are able to make up for in the ad unit that I just explained. Again, this one on the left, which brands can put dollars behind media spend and target effectively so that users are then driven straight to the platform or straight to the effect itself. And because of some of these platform nuances or limitations, AR effects should be utilized for brand awareness first at this point today, rather than a straight conversions play. Again, since in many cases, it's not possible to directly get to site from the filter experience. While this might feel a little bit nerve-wracking for performance-focused or growth marketers, I think it's really crucial, especially considering all of Yory's points and the growth and what we're expecting to see in the coming months, years. You kind of got to get in there and start testing and learning. So, get ahead of it, start seeing what works for your users, what they're engaging with, and continue to grow and evolve from there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great point. But what are some creative ways that brands are telling their stories with AR today?
Yes, there are so many interesting ways to tell your brand story with augmented reality because it's such an exciting and unique and sort of bespoke creative. But I think that can feel pretty daunting to a lot of brands who are trying to get into this space as well. Each platform is really developing their own kind of nomenclature for these different formats of AR effects. But to date, at least at QuickFrame, I think we're seeing the majority of our brand partners tap into these 4 key buckets of augmented reality effects. So people effects, world effects, gamified effects, and AR try-on effects. So depending on your unique brand, your vertical, and the platforms that you want to run on, it might be helpful to my previous point, try out a couple of different styles, gauge your consumer interest and level of partaking or engaging with your brand in this new format. We'd also recommend avoiding overly branded, overly product-focused effects, because again, we want to lean into creativity, light information, and ultimately keep it fun, keep it light.
And how can AR complement a brand's existing marketing strategy?
This is a great question, especially considering some of those existing direct response limitations that we're seeing today when it does come to AR ad units. Sort of double clicking here on a recent example that our team supported Smartwater with. They were less interested, even though this did run across Facebook and Instagram. They did not want to have an ad unit that was driving users to click on the ad unit and then experience the filter. Instead, they really wanted to push for this organic experience. So in tandem with an influencer marketing campaign that they had, which was to support a new launch of several different new product SKUs, we built this effect for them that they then used to send out to several hundred influencers who received new product, press boxes, etc. And they were asked to share what they received from the brand using this filter. So that helped to get more eyeballs on the filter, get more users to try it themselves, increase shares, engagement, etc.
And so finally, Hannah, if you could have listeners take one thing away from this presentation, what would that be?
I think that when it comes to augmented reality and virtual reality, again, this format might feel daunting. It might feel somewhat foreign to a lot of brands, but its prevalence and its relevance across platform is only going to continue to grow this year and beyond. Regardless of your vertical, remember that AR experiences should feel fun and playful and not take themselves too seriously. At the end of the day, we're asking our users to spend their precious time engaging in a branded experience. So find a good production partner and start testing.
Great, thank you so much, Hannah. It's now time to get into our audience Q&A. As I said, we have received a ton of great questions, and Hannah and Yory, I'll let you both take a chance at answering them. But the first question that we have actually relates to our forecast. So Yory, I think this one is probably for you. And it is, how do you think that supply issues will affect the forecast?
I mean, it's a really interesting question, and I think we tried to bake it into our forecast. It's a recent forecast, and the supply issues were already there. But I think with the war in Ukraine, with some of the additional disruptions with fuel and oil, I think the supply issues are probably just going to get worse. In general, I think it was going to limit growth a little bit, the supply issues. But on the other hand, I think we've been really conservative with our estimates. That a lot of things like the, what are smart glasses? If Apple does release something down the line that takes over the market, that could really transform AR. Same thing with VR. So I think short-term supply chain issues might dampen the impact of growth, might dampen growth a little bit. Long-term, I think we were pretty conservative. So I think we're probably in line even with supply chain problems right now.
Great. Hannah, I think this might be a good question for you. It is, do you think that AR will eventually be applied to more non-social channels like CTV or digital out of home?
Yeah, I think that what we can expect to continue seeing again is growth. Yory touched on some of this in his presentation, but we're already seeing an increase in the use of AR and VR in advertising like out of home with QR codes that users can scan their phones over when they're out and about and experience that, or on Amazon boxes. I think when it comes to formats like CTV, we kind of need to wait and see how things progress in terms of technology that's developing with the different spectacles and the lenses. And kind of to your point during Yory's presentation or your question, like who's going to win here? Especially, I think when it comes to the hardware piece of it, understanding where that leads will be helpful in knowing how widespread AR and VR can be. But again, sort of in the meantime, it's not going anywhere. So we definitely recommend going after some of that low-hanging fruit and getting started.
So a lot of the questions that we received actually were about, the winners and perhaps losers in this race. So one of them is, which company do you see as being the biggest wild card in the race to AR and VR?
So just from a hardware perspective, I think Amazon has been really quiet in AR and VR, but they have outstanding depth, outstanding visual recognition technology, computer vision. So I think they'll probably become a lot bigger player down the line. Google, same thing. Google, I mean, is not totally in the background, but those two companies, they're not under the radar by any means. But Amazon is a little bit when it comes to AR and VR, and I think they'll probably play a bigger role down the line.
Absolutely. Okay, we have time for one last question, and Hannah, I think this one might be good for you. What industry or verticals do you think will face the biggest hurdles applying AR to their campaigns?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that today, advertisers that are like only focusing on conversions, and if maybe you're working with a smaller marketing budget or you don't have dollars to play with when it comes to brand awareness, like if you really need to show a return on every dollar you're putting into advertising, I can see AR feeling a little bit harder to, I guess, stomach, because we are still in this exploratory phase that brand awareness is really king in the space. Clients that have a very specifically technical product that they are looking for users to be able to understand in maybe a step-by-step experiential way might be challenging to get across, again, in sort of this playful, lighthearted format. But that doesn't mean that these types of brands or brands with, intense legal teams or ones that have trouble exploring new formats in general can't get started. It just, again, is going to really require them to shift how they are sending those messages out. So maybe instead of a really detailed explainer video that's step by step, you do lean more into product awareness, surprising and delighting, getting users to share and engage, and seeing what kind of trickle down you can get from there. But in general, I really do think that AR advertising and ad units are so, again, bespoke creative, they are unique, there's so much you can do with them. So more than happy to connect with any brands who might be interested in exploring this and coming up with some cool ways to do that.
And that is a perfect note to end on. Thanks again to Yory for joining us, and a very special thank you to Hannah and to the team at QuickFrame by Mountain. Our eMarketer production crew behind the scenes also deserves a huge thank you for making today's webinar possible. As promised, we'll be emailing you soon with a link to the slides and a full recording. But before we wrap up, let me take a moment to tell you what's happening across eMarketer's media channels. You can register for upcoming live Analyst and Tech Talk webinars at emarketer.com/webinars. On the audio side, don't forget to tune in to Behind the Numbers, eMarketer's daily podcast at emarketer.com/podcast. And finally, please check out our newsletters. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.